Kia ora everyone, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Kathryn Murphy and I'm a third year PhD candidate in the Long Room Hub Research Institute at Trinity College Dublin. My research background is war elephants in antiquity, but today I'd like to share with you a little bit about my current doctoral research, which looks at the design and choreography of animal spectacles in the Roman Empire. Specifically, I'd like to look at a particular group of animals that really captivated the Romans over 2,000 years ago and who continue to captivate us nowadays for better or for worse, and that is the large cats. My aim for this talk is to draw attention to some of the ways in which large cats, in particular the lions, the leopards, and the tigers, were exploited for political advancement and popularity in Roman spectacles. And in doing so, I would like to invite reflection on our own exploitative relationship with these animals in the recent years and what their future may look like if we continue on this trajectory. We know better, but are we any better than our classical predecessors is the question I'd like to challenge you all with today. So, just a brief introduction to what these spectacles involved. The setting for the games took place in a range of entertainment venues, including the circus, stadium, theatre, and most commonly, the amphitheatre. The animal displays were called a venatio, literally meaning a hunt, and this included a wide range of animal entertainments and interactions between humans and animals with other animals. But they were not only hunts, although this was certainly the more popular type of wild beast display, especially in the earlier games. Animals featured in executions, theatrical and trained stunts, but they were also there to simply be marveled at. When spectacles were regulated in the early empire, a typical day of games started with the venationes, followed by executions, sometimes involving the animals, and ended with the creme de la creme of displays, the gladiators. For much of the Republic, those responsible for producing public civic events, the editores, were Rome's powerful elite, who used them as a source of revenue to gain political popularity, though this was later monopolized by the emperors when the games were linked with the imperial cult. The story of the arena is therefore one of dynamic power relations between different groups in Roman society, but which also extended to the natural world. For the remainder of this talk, I would like to focus on the role of cats within this complex relation. So right off the bat, the type of animals one displayed in a public spectacle said a lot about their position of power, their wealth, and social connections. Lions and leopards were primarily procured from North Africa and Syria, whereas tigers were sourced from even further afield, from India, Armenia, and around the Caspian Sea. None of these animals were native to Italy, so in Rome, if you wanted them at your games, you needed a strong network of political and social contacts who could get their hands on supplies and deliver them safely to Rome. One of the most well-known correspondences on this topic comes from a letter written by the Roman politician Marcus Caelius Rufus to Cicero when he was governor of Cilicia, requesting Panthere for his upcoming games. Cicero's response to this request carries a rather comical undertone. He writes, "About the panthers, the usual hunters are doing their best on my instructions, but the creatures are in remarkably short supply, and those we have are said to be complaining bitterly because they are the only beings in my province who have to fear designs against their safety." Accordingly, they are reported to have decided to leave the province and go to Caria, a neighboring town in southern Asia Minor. The anxiety of not being able to obtain said creatures and consequently having to rely on local, perhaps less striking animals was certainly real for these officials, especially if their appearance in the upcoming games had already been advertised. We know this from the many letters written by Symmachus in the 4th century AD, who ran into several issues regarding the acquisition of exotics from faraway lands. In one incident, he even lost all of his quarry through a shipwreck. Having expensive animals from outlandish territories was therefore a high-risk and high-gain decision, but one that carried significant weight for political actors and their audience. To this end, large cats played an important communicative role in solidifying transcultural relations and promoting agencies of power within the elite community. The number of animals that appeared in Roman spectacles also demonstrated power in which the editore was capable of exercising over these foreign lands. Now, we do have to be careful about how we interpret these figures, as they are given to us in the literary sources. In modern scholarship, the three classic examples which historians tend to regurgitate are the 3,500 Africanae, hunted across 26 Venationes under Augustus, the 9,000 wild and tame animals dispatched in the Colosseum over 100 days for its inauguration under Titus, and the 11,000 animals hunted across 123 days in Trajan's reign. These neat rounded figures are also seen in the documentation of exotic cats. Pliny the Elder gives a polished account of some of the major games produced during the Republic in Book 8, Chapter 10 of his Natural History. Accordingly, the first of all who exhibited a combat of 100 maned lions was Lucius Sulla, later dictator in his praetorship. After Sulla, Pompey the Great showed in the circa 600, including 315 with manes, and Caesar, when dictator, 400. Later in chapter 24, he notes that Scaurus, in his aedileship, first sent in procession 150 female leopards in one flock, Pompey the Great 410, and the late lamented Augustus 420. Augustus, he continues, was the first of all persons at Rome who exhibited a tamed tiger in a cage, although his late Majesty Claudius exhibited 4 at one time. Pliny's comments provide an interesting insight into the political and aesthetic reception of large cat displays in Rome. Firstly, it is interesting to note that he lists these figures consecutively, which immediately conveys sentiments of competition and rivalry between the named editores. This is particularly evident in the case of the tigers. Augustus may have been the first to show a tiger in Rome, but it was Claudius who has so far exhibited the most. Again, given the rarity of these species, the appearance of 4 tigers was probably quite novel at the time. So irrespective of their credibility, the style in which the figures are presented indicates that Pliny wanted his readership to see how these staged hunts bear comparison with or even surpass those produced by their predecessors and their successors. But another detail that may have also conveyed ideas of power, albeit subtle, is Pliny's distinction between the biological sex of these animals. Of all the large cats, lions are the only ones to display sexual dimorphism, meaning that males and females appear distinctly different. Male lions have the iconic large mane, which serves as a signal to other lions about its physical fitness. It's also a sign of sexual maturity, since male lions will only start to grow their manes when they're about 2 years of age. But to us, the mane is also visually impressive and makes the animal appear large and formidable. It therefore confers strong emotional meaning upon the animal. The aesthetic reception of lions is also alluded to in Diocletian's price edict, which dates to the early 4th century AD. A first-class lion sold for 150,000 denarii, whereas a first-class lioness valued at 125,000. Interestingly, the same price as a second-class lion. Yet other species, including the leopard and the bear, are only distinguished in the edict by their quality, not sex. What then was the significance of exhibiting maned lions over other members of that species? Well, considering that the mane grows with age, amongst other environmental and internal factors, specimens valued at a higher price in the edict were most likely older, larger, stronger, and perhaps more challenging animals to capture and translocate than others. The mane, then, as an expression of the animal's biological and behavioural power, perhaps translated into the editore's own political and social standing, since if you could afford a first-class lion, you evidently held an authoritative position in Roman society. In this respect, human excellency mirrored that of the lion. But above all, the way in which human participants interacted with big cats and Venationes tells us a lot about power dynamics in the arena. Combats between humans and non-humans represented the constant struggle against the natural world, and large cats, being predators, were regarded as a threat to civilized life and community resources. In the latter empire, environmental exploitation and predator depletion within the provinces of North Africa intensified from efforts to maximize agricultural productivity. And part of this productivity was the dramatic growth of cities and building activities, like the construction of amphitheatres, which inevitably drove large cat populations into direct conflict with herds and farm labourers. Luxurius alludes to this in a poem written in the 5th century AD, which celebrates agricultural productivity around a private seaside villa on account of trapping expeditions for the local Venatianes. He writes, quote, "The countryside marvels at the triumphs of the amphitheatre, and the forest notices that strange wild beasts are there. The many farmers look at new struggles while ploughing, and the sailor sees varied entertainments from the sea. The fertile land loses nothing, the plants grow in great abundance, while all the wild beasts fear their fate here." End quote. The direct connection between agricultural efficiency and public spectacles highlights the awareness of the symbiotic relations between the two activities. Hunting large cats in the arena thus protected human communities and their resources. In a symbolic level, their death also evoked sentiments of Roman conquest and ascendancy over those lands. This, of course, extended to the emperor's own identity as master of the natural world. As I mentioned before, large cats were also used to hunt and kill others in public executions called damnatio ad bestiae. Like wild animals, criminals and prisoners of war were considered threats to civilized life, so the physical destruction of these subhumans, especially in the hands or paws of a natural force, restored social order in the community. By making these judicial penalties public, the emperor was actively seen endorsing law and order in his empire. Large cats fit the bill because of their natural propensity for violence and predation, though of course agonistic behaviour was not always guaranteed, and arena attendants would be standing by with aversive instruments such as whips, goads, and fire to manipulate and elicit aggression. This in itself was a power display, as it gave human participants a degree of control over the animal's reactions. Control over nature also manifested in trained performances, where large cats performed tricks very much like those you'd find in the 19th and the 20th century circuses. In the Colosseum, for instance, one could find leopards yoked to chariots, tigers trained to caress their keepers' hands, and lions that held hares safely between their jaws. The last of these is referenced no less than 7 times in Martial's epigrams, which celebrates the Colosseum's inauguration in AD 80. In epigram 1.14, he writes, quote, "We have seen the pranks, the sportive gambols of the lions. Caesar, this too the arena offers you. When the hare, as often as seized, returned from the gentle fang, and ran at large through the open jaws. How comes it that a greedy lion can spare his captive prey? Ah, but he is said to be yours, therefore he can." End quote. In 1.104, he continues, "Such clemency does not come by training. The lions know whom they serve." Martial flatters his patron, i.e. the emperor, by asserting that his authority over nature is powerful enough to render the wild tame. The lion therefore acts against its natural propensities, not from training, but because of its devotion to the emperor. The true masters of nature are therefore not those who actually train or fight these animals, but the individuals whom they are politically tied to. I'd like to conclude this talk by briefly revisiting the question I posed at the beginning. We know better, but are we any better than our classical predecessors? As a historian, I believe it is important not to impose modern sensibilities onto the past, especially in the context of the arena games, where it is too easy to fall into the trap of interpreting these exploitations as acts against animal welfare. We must remember this is a very modern concept, so it is anachronistic to suppose that a militaristic society like the Romans had this at the back of their mind when they were producing a Venatio. I am not here to condemn the past, but I am here to question why we are continuing to treat these beautiful animals as ephemera objects that we so readily use for personal advancement. The recent Tiger King documentary, released in March 2020, exposed this grim reality. Throughout the series, we are shown the many ways in which wildlife traffickers in the States profited off these animals in a bid to advance their social, financial, and even at one point, their political advancement. One of the ways they did this was through cub petting, which appropriates the aesthetic attractiveness of baby tigers. People pay large sums of money to have their photo taken with a cub, and then they upload them onto social media as a way to boost their own popularity and social following. At one point in the series, we even saw cubs being dragged into casinos and used as bait to entice women. According to Joe Exotic, the self-proclaimed Tiger King himself, cubs aged between 4 and 16 weeks old could sell for $100,000. But beyond that, they become a danger and a liability to their handlers. What happens then is that they're either terminated or translocated to research centres that may or may not even be true sanctuaries. In other words, once they have served our needs, whatever they may look like, they are disposed of as if they're no more than ephemera objects. In these interactions, they may be far removed from those witnessed in the Roman arena, but the exploitation of wildlife for personal advancement is sadly a transcultural and a transhistorical trend. I fear that if we continue on this trajectory, it is not only the wild cats that we will be losing. We are already seeing a significant reduction in biodiversity across the world, and these captive exploits like cub petting is contributing to the problem. We all have a choice whether or not to enter the arena, and that is a challenge I'll leave you all with today. Thank you.